Throughout my career as a teacher, and then as a hospital chaplain, and now as a parish priest, I have learned that "I don't know" is one of the most important phrases in the world. "I don't know" is a holy phrase. "I don't know" opens the door to things like, "But I want to learn. Can you help me understand?" Or even, "Neither do I. That's okay." Never be afraid to say, "I don't know." In seminary, professors told us that "I don't know" is sometimes the only thing we can say for sure about the scriptures. And today's parable is one example of those. I think this year of lectionary readings is all the strange parables in a row. Today's parable, like many of Jesus' parables, has confused and flummoxed scholars and preachers for many years. So, as is our tradition, I will tell you the traditional way people interpret this and give you a different way to read it as well. The traditional interpretation makes for a great stewardship sermon. Today's Ingathering Sunday, after all. The traditional interpretation is probably what you've heard before. The master signifies Christ, who blessed his servants with many blessings according to their ability. 2 of the 3 used those blessings to bring forth more blessings for their master, and they were rewarded. The 3rd servant played it safe, buried his money in the ground, and he received a harsh punishment. The traditional interpretation tends to focus more on the front half of the story. Here's what the good servants do with their blessing. In fact, our word talent in English comes from this parable. Our word talent evolved to mean a God-given gift or ability. But in the original language, a talent was actually an obscene amount of money. It was like 15 to 20 years worth of salary for labor. So what the master is giving away is a ridiculous amount of money, like more than many of these people would ever see in their whole lives. So imagine listening to Jesus tell this story, and it's just baffling. If we read the parable in this traditional way, we might conclude that if we use our God-given blessings, our time, talent, and treasure to grow the church, and the church is an expression of God's love in the world, then we too are being good and trustworthy servants. The sermon almost writes itself. It's not a big stretch. It's kind of instinctive to assign Jesus the role of master in the story. He goes away and then returns, just like Matthew says Jesus is going to. Reading the parable this way encourages us to be brave, to take risks with our giving, to give sacrificially, to prioritize giving away what we have to both the church and people who are in need, to create more blessings in order to share those with others. Those are all good things. It's a nice moral for a nice stewardship lesson. Nothing wrong with this reading of the parable. It is just fine. But that means you have to ignore the little niggling feeling of doubt that always shows up whenever there's weeping and gnashing of teeth and throwing into darkness. And we can't ignore it. So, is Jesus really saying that he and God are like the master in this story? Because if we read the whole parable, the master is not cast in a favorable light. First, he takes his enormous wealth and gives it to his servants according to their ability, meaning he probably knows the one is going to struggle and then still punishes him for it. Then he doesn't really give them instructions, he just gives it to them. And when he gives a cruel punishment to the servant who buried the money when all his crime was to preserve what he was given. Strange thing to be punishing. He didn't do anything wrong. In fact, the other servant, the last one, says, "I was afraid of you because you are a hard man, reaping where you did not sow." Does that sound like Jesus? The last servant who buried his talent appears to be saying to his master, You made your money off of other people's labor. You reaped where you didn't sow the seeds. Which brings me to a different way to read this confusing parable. What if the master does not signify Jesus? What if the point of this parable isn't the nice, gentle, easy stewardship lesson about giving and making more? Jesus is always telling stories with shocking twists. Twists that would scandalize his listeners, especially those with economic or religious power. And this story is already shocking because the amount of money the master is giving out is ridiculous. It is obscene. To the people listening to this story would not have any concept of seeing that amount of money all at once. And the master is congratulating his first two servants for increasing that ridiculous wealth. And that too would have been suspect to the original listeners. Because in ancient Judaism, charging interest was viewed as immoral. It was viewed as cruel. You're taking what you already have a lot and making more off of it from people who needed the help. Writers of liberation theology would have us question this easy reading of the parable. They want us to wonder whose voices are missing, who holds the power, and what are they doing with the power? How does this master figure match or contradict what Jesus has been teaching us? With their questions in mind, we might notice a few things. First, this master in the parable appears to be a cruel and absent landlord. He goes away, profits off of the labor while the people are gone, comes back and punishes them or rewards them. This is not who Matthew has taught us that Jesus is. In Matthew's Jesus says, I'll be with you always, even to the ends of the earth. Matthew's Jesus doesn't vanish, isn't absent, but present with the church always. Even when they don't see him. The very next parable is, Master, when did you ask us for food and we didn't give you any? Truly I tell you, what you did for the least of these or did not do, you did or did not do for me. What's interesting about a cruel and absent landlord in the story is that absentee landowners and their lackeys were the primary way that the Roman Empire interacted with the Jewish people. So Jesus' listeners would have noticed this. They would have seen the character of the landlord, the master, as reminiscent of the Roman oppressors who were making money off of the Jewish labor and not doing any of the work. It's not outside of the realm of possibilities that this parable is actually a sideways critique at those Roman oppressors who were unfairly and unethically profiting off of the Jewish people's work. Thirdly, equating this master figure with Christ is a little problematic because he just doesn't act like Jesus. Matthew's Jesus says, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Not the rich will get richer, and the poor will lose everything. This doesn't make sense. Jesus' gospel is good news to the poor. The God of Israel Jesus tells us about in the Old Testament taught harvesters to always leave some grain behind as they were gathering from the field so that those people who were poor and hungry could come behind them and get grain behind them. Ruth, an ancestor of Jesus, did this so that she and her mother-in-law could live. Jesus tells us about a radical love and a reckless generosity that is constantly bringing good news to the poor, constantly confounding his listeners. He tells the rich young man, you know everything, but there's one thing you lack. Go and sell everything you have and give it to the poor. The early church continued this legacy. They sold all their belongings and lived together in community so that everybody had what they needed. So the master in this parable just doesn't quite match. Liberation theology would have us read this parable and think, this is not a moral lesson about investing money. It's a warning. The third servant isn't lazy and wicked. He's a whistleblower. He's speaking truth to power. He's punished for it. When I read this text over and over this week, I kept coming back to the same conclusion. The person that's acting the most like Jesus in the story is that third servant who says, "You are a harsh man. You have reaped where you didn't work. You have gathered where you didn't scatter seed." And like Christ, this third servant was punished for speaking truth to power. What I hear is Jesus teaching us to do the same thing and warning us that the world might not like it. It might not be easy. I hear Jesus telling us to speak out against systems that misuse the labor of workers, to question systems where the rich get richer and the poor lose everything. I hear Jesus warning us that the system may not like us, questioning it. And some of you may be wondering, is this really what Jesus meant for us to hear when he told this story? And to you, I will offer again these holy words. I don't know. But I want to learn more. And some of you are also thinking, this is the weirdest stewardship sermon I have ever heard. Is she even going to ask us for any money? Yes, getting to that. I would love for you to give generously to St. Antony's for many reasons. And here's today's. Together as a community of faith, along with our diocese and the wider Episcopal Church, we are pushing back against corrupt systems that take advantage of the poor. We're a community of faith who doesn't believe it's okay to just let people go hungry. So we have been gathering food that we give to people who need it. We're a community of faith who believes that people who are suffering, who are cold, who are grieving, who are going through tragedy, deserve comfort and warmth. And so we're giving away these beautiful gifts to keep people warm and comfort them that our witty knitters have made. Your gifts to this church will help us as a community not only to keep the lights on here, but to continue the work in the community of making this little corner of the world a better place. To do what we believe Christ has called us to do. Love our neighbors, push back against injustice, and bring good news to the poor. Amen.